Christmas Eve at the Compass and Cradle by Ed Bernstein and Melissa Shaner. There was finally a hush in the Compass and Cradle on the 24th of December, a relief after the hubbub of the afternoon. I poured myself a half pint and walked with it to the fireplace. I'd made the lingering drinkers and the worn-out kitchen staff go home for their festivities. A good time for old man sorts of thoughts, well after the last murky light of the short day. How many Christmas Eves have I spent in this pub, boy and man? I must have more customers in the graveyard now than in the church. Well, a few minutes of that is enough, and there was work to do. I shut off the gas fire and returned to the counter. I reckoned I'd lock up when I left. No one would be coming for refreshment after midnight mass, though there were plenty of folk who had fortified themselves beforehand with something stronger than communion wine. I had begun to close out the till when I heard a tentative knock that made me jump. Had one of the cooks come to collect some left-behind present? I strode to the kitchen door and called through it, "Who's there?" "I'm sorry, Peck," a familiar voice replied. "I saw you through the window. Can I come in for a minute or two? I'm not looking for a drink. I want Deirdre." I let her in, surprised she'd come back. "What is it, love? Are you all right?" She was close to tears as I led her through the empty kitchen to her stool and automatically took my usual spot on the other side of the bar. "Dee, did something happen?" She unwound her muffler and twisted it in her hands. "I tried to go to church, like I used to with Mum. I slipped inside and sat near the doors, burying my head in the missal, but then the prelude ended and the organ burst out with 'O Come All Ye Faithful,' and it was so loud, and the lights were so bright, and I ran, and I don't want to go back to the house." "It's all right, love. You're welcome to stay a while. I've plenty to do here before I'm ready to leave. Did you need some water, or shall I put the kettle on in the back?" She shook her head. "I don't want to be any more trouble." "No trouble, I promise. It's only natural that Christmas is hard. You had quite a day. Quite an autumn, really. Quite a year." Deirdre took a long breath and rubbed her nose with the fringe of her muffler. "I have." "Did you mean it about the tea?" Part 2. "It's over then, love." The damp scent of autumn air followed Deirdre as she lowered herself onto a stool across from me, a ray of thin, early November sun streaking her untidy hair. The tears I had seen swelling behind her eyes when she walked in began to spill. I set down the glass I had been polishing. "She's in a better place now, yeah? No more suffering. You were a good daughter to her all these years." "She's not suffering, no." I looked at her sideways as I picked up the glass and stowed it onto the counter. "But you are." Deirdre made a choking noise. "Sorry. Of course you are, love. You'd think, as long as I've been behind this bar, I'd learned to keep my foot out of my mouth." I slid her a glass of water, which she gratefully swallowed between sniffles. "I thought maybe things were coming to an end, with you not here for 3 days straight. Were you with her when she went?" Deirdre nodded, crumpling a napkin and wiping her nose on it. "I was there since Wednesday. I didn't even go back to the house. I stayed in her room. The nurses gave me an extra blanket, and the chair pulls out. That's why I look such a mess." "I didn't notice a thing," I winked, and she giggled in spite of herself. "I'm sure you were a comfort to her, love. I hope I have someone sitting with me when I go. Of course, I've got better odds with my 5. She only had you." "I don't think she knew I was there." "Oh, I'm sure she did. They say folk can hear what's happening around them, even if it doesn't seem like it." "Well, then I don't know if she cared." Deirdre's voice was rising, and in return I raised an eyebrow and the bottle of vodka she'd been steadily draining for the past 3 weeks. She nodded again. "Come on now." I poured the vodka over ice, added tonic, and set it in front of her. How can you think that? Taking care of her the way you did after your dad passed, even before she got sick. Deirdre crushed the slice of lime between her fingers until it splashed into the glass. She didn't wipe the droplets from her face. Last night, a little after 2, she was lucid for a while. I had been dozing, I suppose, leaning on the bed rail and holding her hand, but when she started talking, I woke right up. "Oh, my darling," she said, "you've come back. I'm so glad you've come back." "I'm here, Mum," I said. "I've been right here. I followed the ambulance when they took you to the hospital, remember?" But she wasn't looking at me. She was so surprised, so delighted, so grateful. I've never seen her look at me that way. A thought struck me. Was it your dad, maybe? Come to fetch her home? Folks say, no, it wasn't Dad. Deirdre rubbed her fingers along the sides of the glass, cold and wet with condensation, and pressed them against her eyes. "Now, love, you know you were always her darling." She said, "You were always my treasure." There now. No. Deirdre frowned at me, briefly present before mine veered again to the hospital. "I'm sorry," she said. "Mum," I said, "there's nothing to be sorry for. You've always been a good mother to me." But it's like she didn't hear. "I'm sorry I sent you away. I didn't want to. They said I had to. Said I should be ashamed. But I never was. Not of you." She said, "I've been waiting for you, and now you've come back." "Mum," I said, "I'm right beside you. I've never left, Mum." And she pulled her hand out of mine to stretch her arms forward. I'm so glad you're here," she said, looking beyond me. "What a time we'll have, at last." And her breath rattled in her throat, and her eyes went dull. And when I reached for her hand again, it was already going cold. Part 3. "Welcome back, love. The usual." Deirdre planted herself on a regular stool, nodding agreement, and unwound her muffler. I poured her a vodka and tonic. She seemed tired and preoccupied, toying with the tumbler without sipping from it. "I have no right to know. That's what the last one said. To my face, I have no right to know." "Oh, no. Not that they had those records anyway, that they'll admit to. I might reveal the secret graves in the garden." To be fair, some of them did have those. "No right to know." Deirdre pulled at her drink. "Who has a better right?" I clucked my tongue. I could remember, or thought I could, that Nora was one of those girls who went away and came back. Not the first from the village, nor the last. No one talked about it in those days. No one wanted to know, or wanted anyone else to know. She plunked down her tumbler. "But," she said proudly, "I've found her." "What? How?" "The internet, mostly. An undercover reporter wrote an expose on their dark history, made some references I followed up. Turns out there's a list of adoptees they could put their names on, and she'd done it. The couple that took her must have told her where they got her from, bless them. I was able to pinpoint the birth date near enough. It's not hard to find people once you know they're there." "Oh, proud of you, Dee. That's clever. What did you learn then?" Deirdre ticked each fact off on her fingers. "Her name is Tracy. She's 65 years old. Heck, Mum would have been 17 when she was born. No wonder they sent her away to that place." I frowned and nodded. I would have been 5 when it happened. Poor Nora. When I was 17, I was larking about, planning get-rich-quick schemes and trying to get my Annie to pay me any mind. Deirdre would have been planning for university. Deirdre was still ticking. She used to work in a bank. She's married. She's got kids of her own. Grandkids. She lives in Sheffield. All that from Google. Deirdre shook her head and waggled the last of her counting fingers at me. I've messaged her through the adoptee list thing. She'll be nearby for the holidays to see her children. She's going to meet me here for lunch on Christmas Eve. She looked triumphant and terrified. I'll be damned. Will you have another, love? No, not tonight. I only came in for a bit of warm and dry, really. Well, and to warn you that both of Nora McGowan's girls will be under your roof at once. She sighed. There's packing yet to do at the house. My mother's life will take more boxes than I thought. She tipped the glass back and forth, listening to the ice clink. Bigger than I thought. Have you eaten? I asked. You need food, proper food. Deirdre shrugged. You lived on crisps and curry at the end there, and what you're living on now. Your mother would insist on meat and 2 veg. When did you become an old woman then? I've no time to cook. No patience for it. And she'll not be peering over my shoulder from the great beyond anyway, criticizing my dietary choices. She's got her treasure now. She scowled. Hey, now. Your mother loved you, Dee. She may not have been a saint, but she cared for you. Deeply. Fiercely. Deirdre stood up and jammed her arms into her coat sleeves. Sorry, Mum. I'll eat my vegetables. You can rest in the arms of the angels, knowing I'm full up on vitamin K. Dee, love, she's real, Peck. She's coming back. And out she went, into the rain. Part 4. Deirdre had taken time with her makeup, I noticed, as she practically burst through the door and stared at me with wild eyes. I shook my head. No strangers yet. You're early. She exhaled and scoped the room, then picked the corner table that I'd been keeping empty for her. She dumped her coat and muffler on a chair and came up to the bar. Lemonade, I think. Happy Christmas, I said, setting a glass on the counter. And happy early birthday. I set a bottle next to it. Oh, God, she replied. Yes, tomorrow. Thanks. It'll be all right. Deirdre opened her mouth to say something, rubbed her forehead, then closed it again. She took her lemonade over to the table, fished her phone from her coat and propped it up. The Milliken women came in for their annual lunch party then, and after that, Ron and Marge Lumley. And by the time I caught my breath, a woman not that much younger than me had made her way to the bar. I'm looking for someone, she said. I gestured to the corner where Deirdre was already standing up. I watched them smile awkwardly, choose not to hug, and sit across from each other. Deirdre fiddling with her napkin while her guests studied the menu. I gave them a few minutes before going over as a stream of customers filled the rest of the tables. The last outing before Christmas. Some for a bite, some for a pint, some wandering through with holiday wishes. Everyone tried not to pry, but they were as curious as I was. Most of them were probably wondering if the stranger had come to buy the house. It had been the main topic of conversation since Nora died, after all. Would Deirdre stay or go? And if she went, who'd buy the old place and for how much? I wondered that myself. When I took their lunch orders, ham sandwich with extra mustard for Deirdre, fish and chips for Tracy, they had progressed to the sort of polite expression that strangers eating together in restaurants have. The whole conversation stayed cordial as far as I could tell, while exchanging holiday cheer with what must have been every blessed person who lived within 10 miles. When I went to see if they wanted pudding, Deirdre asked me to take a photo of the two of them. They stayed on their opposite sides of the table, smiles frozen as I shifted my thumb off the edge of the lens. After I returned Deirdre's phone, I turned expectantly to Tracy, but she left hers face down. Pudding refused, bills paid, they didn't linger. Or at least this new person didn't linger. And they didn't embrace or weep or anything embarrassing. They typed each other's numbers into their contacts and nodded with the same politeness. And then the door swung shut behind the stranger. And Deirdre came over to the bar and drank a vodka tonic in 2 gulps. Well, I asked. She's nice. She's fine. She's fine. So it was fine then. Don't be stupid. She folded her arms and glared at me. Then the Widdicombe's blew in, jolly and loud and handing around ginger biscuits. And then Mr. Patel singing off-key about wassail. When I had a moment again, Deirdre was chewing on a biscuit, ready to talk. She's fine. She's just not my sister. It was the wrong woman, I asked, surprised. No, the right woman, the wrong... I don't know. The right genetics, the wrong family? Yes, she was the baby my mother had 20 whatever years before she had me, but she's not looking for... She waved her hand, brushing away the idea. She wants her medical background, just in case. So I can give her that, at least from Mum's side. She stared at the ice in the bottom of the tumbler. I waited for her to say the rest. She said she had a mother already. The woman who raised her. She has a sister too, actually. Deirdre knitted her eyebrows. It's not like I wanted... And then she was sobbing. Full-on sobbing, the way she hadn't done at the funeral. I found a clean towel and handed it to her and waited some more. I miss her, Peck. Oh, God. I want to tell her that her treasure turned out... She buried her face in the towel. I set a glass of water on the bar and cleared the dishes from her table so I wasn't looming over her. I don't try to make my customers pour out their troubles to me. My father used to tell me we heard more confessions than the priest and saw more tears than the eye doctor. Sometimes it's just part of the job. Sometimes it's a privilege. The lunch crowd was filtering out now. I began sorting condiments into their tubs behind the bar. Deirdre had been to the ladies and returned. She stayed quiet for a few breaths. I guess I don't understand how, now that she knows I'm here, now that she knows what happened to Mum, she could just give us up. I set down the bottle of brown sauce. D. Her bewilderment lasted only an instant before the tears started again. Oh. Oh, Christ. All right, love. All right. I had a fleeting thought that her mother would have scolded her for using the Lord's name in vain. On his birthday, almost. I nodded at the Lumleys as they left. Mrs. Owusu came in and herded her two children to the table by the window for their usual lemonades. None of us acknowledged the sobbing wreck on her second dish rag and vodka tonic. I hoped the Christmas gossip would be kind. People liked Deirdre for coming back properly and caring for Nora. All right, love, I repeated. Sorry. Yes. Sorry. I must be a fright. She rubbed mascara from her cheeks, then wiped her blackened fingers on my towel. I'll go. No, I said. Then added, I'm not serving you another vodka, mind. Deirdre laughed at that, eyes still full. Oh, God. Thank you. She noticed the rag she was holding. I'll launder this. I reached for it. They've seen worse than that, love. It'll all come out in the wash. Will it? Does it? Deirdre, your mother wanted for her the same thing she wanted for you. To be happy and healthy and loved. Was that not what happened? Yes, but there you are then. She didn't know. She never knew. Tracy the treasure may have come back for an hour or two. but it was too late for it to mean anything. I held the rag out again, but Deirdre was more angry than tearful now. She headed for the door, only turning to toss a strangled "Happy Christmas" over her shoulder. Part 5. A car whizzed past, headlamps striping the walls for an instant. Deirdre and I weren't the only sinners skipping midnight mass. I left her alone at the counter and went to put the kettle on the hob. A later night than I expected, but no matter. I'd have a lovely lie-in without having to play Father Christmas at dawn. Grandchildren on my lap at a civilized hour for once. Tonight, I was still needed at the CNC. Deirdre was saying, I thought that once I met this woman, I wouldn't be angry with my mother anymore. That I wouldn't have any more... Hang on, I interrupted. I hadn't heard the latch click or felt the outside air brush by me, but there was a figure standing, hovering almost my eyes, just inside the front door. We've closed, I called out, hurrying to the till and sliding the cash drawer shut. You're welcome back on Boxing Day. But instead of an apology and a retreat, the shape moved closer, into the warm circle lit by the lamps over the bar. A teenaged girl, not dressed for the weather, with a worried face and a cardigan that couldn't quite button around her waist. Something about her expression tugged at the edges of my memory. I'm not looking for a drink, she said, glancing backward into the shadows. Aside from the undeniable swell of her dress, she was slight and held herself in a way that shrank from attention, although there was also a suggestion of health and confidence and spark only recently diminished. I'm glad to hear it, I replied, gesturing at her belly. She didn't smile and tried to tug the cardigan closed with her hands inside her pockets. You all right, love? You need to use the phone? You must be frozen. Deirdre added, I could give you a lift somewhere. I'm looking for someone, she said. He used to come in here of an evening when he was passing through. Brown hair, blue eyes, tall, a bit older than me. He's got a green coat and a smile like a sunrise. There's no one here now but the two of us, love. Dee's not a man and I'm old enough to be your grandfather. Can I ring somebody for you? Do you need to sit down? She hesitated and then perched on a stool, bracing her arm against the bar. She seemed to find it hard to balance, and no wonder. I've just put the kettle on anyway. Has he been by, though? The blue-eyed man with the beautiful smile? A hint of a blush eased her pallor. Ah, so you do mean me, I teased, and this time she giggled a bit as Deirdre snorted. Has he got a name, this man of yours? Jimmy Ramsey. Deirdre and I looked at each other questioningly. I haven't seen him for some time. I hoped maybe he'd come back. I shook my head. Not everyone gives me a name, no reason they should. Why do you want to find him then? Her dark eyes met mine for a long moment. Oh, love. I don't want money from him. Nothing like that. I don't even want to go with him anymore. I want him to know that he's left something behind. Maybe he has people who could take her before they take her away from me. She put her hand on her belly and smiled. It's a girl. I'm sure it's a girl. I've never been so certain of anything. I call her Ashlyn, my dream. The smile faded. They'll want me to believe it's a dream afterwards. She glanced around as if wanting to make sure we weren't overheard. They do talk about it, you know. The thing nobody talks about. They tell tales, mostly in whispers. Not to the men, of course. We talk about it too where I am, though they try to stop us. Which they can't. Our stories aren't easy to hide forever, are they? kettle shrieked, and all three of us startled. "I'll get it," said Deirdre. "You'll put it on for me anyway." She turned to the visitor. "I'll bring you a cup." The young woman started to reply, but Deirdre had already disappeared. "Go on." "Let her mother you," I said, jerking my head toward Deirdre. "She's very good at it." The girl managed a brief and wistful smile. "Being taken care of might be nice." "And have you got a name, love?" She twisted a loose bit of brown hair around her finger, which made her appear even more of a child than she was. "It's Nora McGowan." I felt as though I'd lost my footing. Though both my boots were planted securely on the floorboards, I couldn't help glancing into the kitchen where Deirdre was pouring the tea. "I'm looking for someone," the visitor repeated, but the timbre of her voice had dropped and hoarsened. I gaped at her, wide-eyed and wordless, as her form began to shimmer and distort. Her face was now fuller, her hair now pulled back, a stylish cardigan now draped across her shoulder, a ring now glinting on her left hand. Her heavy belly rested on her lap, larger than before. I heard Deirdre gasp behind me, the mugs in her hands clattering. "He's not been here tonight, Mrs. Carnaby," I stammered, but she gave an exasperated headshake, and the worry in her eyes remained. "Has she been back?" She fidgeted with the hem of her cardigan and cautiously scanned the pub. "Pardon?" I gripped the sides of the till with both hands. It felt as solid as it had 10 minutes ago when I was counting the evening's take. The room was exactly as it had been. Glasses tidied away, a loose bit of tinsel shoved onto the bottom shelf, a few as yet unopened holiday cards stashed next to the stack of clean rags, with cash I'd share with the kitchen staff on their return. But in front of me now was Deirdre's mum. Deirdre's mum as she must have been 40-odd years before. Deirdre's mum, suddenly grown out of the brown-haired waif of 17. "Has she been back?" the woman repeated. "I need to see her. I need to know that this..." A hand went to her belly. "I need to know that it'll be all right this time." Deirdre crept hesitantly to my side, setting down a cup of tea in front of me, the second in front of her mum, and the last in front of herself. The spinning of my brain made me dizzy, and I stared down at the buttons of the till until the numbers sorted themselves into a sequence of dates. I looked back up at her, anxious and weary, in need of counsel, like so many folk who'd been sat on that stool before her. And after, I suppose. My brain spun again. Suddenly the child in her was as present as the girl who'd gone away. My heart began to crack. "Nora, love, did they tell you where she went?" "They did not. They said they'd give her a family, a proper family, one she needn't be ashamed of. I'm glad. I don't want to take her away from them, nothing like that. I only want to know that she's safe, that everything..." She shifted uncomfortably on the stool and wound her fingers more tightly into the jumper's edge. Deirdre started to speak, and I laid my hand over hers to quiet and to comfort her. She balled her hand into a fist under mine, her whole body taut and trembling. "And I want..." Nora ran her palm along the front of her dress. "This is the farthest along I've been since I married Archie. There've been others that wouldn't stay over the years. Every time he's cried with me as I've curled up, moaning and praying and bleeding, he's held me and cried and told me that he loves me and that it isn't my fault." "Of course it's not," I began, but she carried on. "It must be. I'm being punished. But I can't tell Archie that, can I?" Tears were starting to spill down Nora's cheeks, and she wrapped her arms around herself and rocked. "And he feels sorry for me." I remembered then the muttering I'd hear on the nights my dad made me stay to help him pull pints. When Archie and Nora Carnaby came in for a pie and a game or two of darts with their neighbours. Still no children, poor man. He ought to have done better than marry a woman her age. And there was a pattern, too, I'd seen once I started working behind the bar regularly. It'd be a pint for Archie and a half pint for Nora. Then he'd ask for only one. And then, sometime after, he'd come in on his own, order something stronger, and down it in the corner by himself. Who would punish you then? Don't I deserve it? God? Ashlyn? I had a baby, and I let her go, and now I can't keep another. I've held on so long this time. If I could see her, I might believe that I can bring a baby out alive, and if she could hear me, I'd ask her. I'd beg her to let me have this gift. Nora wiped her eyes on the cuff of her cardigan. And if by some miracle it lives this time, if we both live, because that's always the way the story could end, isn't it? Will it be able to love me? Will it look straight into my heart and see my Ashlyn there instead? Will I be able to hold it, nurse it, kiss it, and not be thinking constantly of the baby who grew up in somebody else's house and arms? That'd be the sternest punishment of all, I think. Deirdre started to reach across the counter to touch her, but I caught her elbow, suddenly afraid that her hand would go straight through, substantial as Nora seemed, with her eyes red and the fabric of her dress straining with each weepy hiccup. And Deirdre herself seemed less substantial now, the light and shadow almost going through her, the tears running down her cheeks, her sleeves slipping from my grasp. If I told this ghost, this presence from 40 years ago, that the daughter she was carrying was... would they both disappear? I tried to soothe my nerves with the familiar friction of glass and rag, polishing a tumbler I'd washed an hour ago. Then Deirdre, into the silence, took a deep breath and said, "That's just your brain playing its old tricks on you. Drink your tea." And with that, they both seemed more solid. "Look at you now, rosy and healthy and strong. You're doing everything that needs to be done. You oughtn't fret yourself." I added, "Trust me, Nora Carnaby, it'll be a fine baby with lusty lungs, and you'll take one peep at its wee toes and impossibly tiny eyelashes, and you'll fall in love, no question. I have 5 myself, you know, and each of them as precious as gold." Deirdre smiled at me then, and the desire surged to tell Nora that it was her that came back, her that spent years taking care of Nora like an angel until a few weeks ago, when this woman, whose face was plump and barely lined, whose gray strands stood out at her temples, who was making such an effort to hold so much inside of her, had died. Nora gave an odd whimper, and I realized that she hadn't been listening. Her eyes were wide and puzzled, and her breathing was quick. She slid off the stool to her feet, wobbled and clutched at her belly. "Oh," she said, looking wildly around the pub and fixing her gaze on the door and then on me. "Oh, she's coming." I flipped up the bar bridge to go to her. The bang reverberated through the empty space, and Deirdre flinched. I stopped short as Nora shimmered again, folded in upon herself, withered. She was still bent over, but now from age, hair white and frowsy, cardigan loose and folded up several times above her thin wrists. This was the old woman I'd seen not many months before, and Deirdre wheeled her along the streets of the village to get both of them some sun and some air. "I'm looking for someone," she said. "Has she come back?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, she came back." Nora peered around, not seeming to see Deirdre, ashen-faced behind the bar. "She's not still here, love. We're closed now. Christmas. Already." She sniffed and wriggled herself up onto her stool. "I'm afraid so. For old time's sake, though," I brandished a brandy glass, "I shouldn't on the house. Christmas, innit?" I almost added live a little, but stopped myself. Nora reached her small hand toward the glass, changed her mind, and let it rest on the counter, revealing the spots and sags of age on her skin. She said, haltingly, "I'm looking for..." She drooped on her stool, her expression vague and tired. I laid my hand next to hers, not touching. "She was here," Deirdre said. "She was here." Nora looked up at her sharply. "Who was here?" "Your daughter." "She's always here." "No, I mean, I'm looking for someone," she said again. "Nora, love." I hate giving people bad news. "Nora, what's the last thing you remember?" "Nothing wrong with my memory, Sonny Jim." I could hear Deirdre rolling her eyes. "Please, before you came in, what's the last thing you can remember? Before you were here at the pub? Did you drive yourself, or who brought you?" "What do you mean?" I came with... I'm looking for..." I leaned over to comfort her, and our hands didn't touch. Nora stared at me and seemed to flicker. For a moment there was dark hair, for a moment smooth skin, for a moment a clear eye, for a moment crow's feet, yellow teeth, loose wisps of hair, slender, stocky, stooped. For a moment youth and age and everything in between. I remember a strong young voice, a pinched rasp, a whisper, a groan, maybe even the gurgle of an infant, all confused together. And then Deirdre reached out her hand and connected. And then Nora blinked and settled and said, "I died." "Oh, Deirdre, I died?" "It's all right, Mum," Deirdre said, her own voice trembling as Nora's crepey fingers wove through hers. "You weren't alone at the end. I was there, and so was Ashlyn." "You saw her?" Nora asked. Deirdre opened and closed her mouth a few times, searching for words. "Not then, but I've seen her since." She gave a bemused laugh. "Mum, I had lunch with her today." "How?" "I looked. After you saw her, after I knew there was someone to look for, and I found her. And she's doing okay. Better than okay. She went to a good family who raised her and loved her and took care of her. She's got kids, Mum. Your grandchildren." Nora drew herself up indignantly. "Deirdre Carnaby, language. She has a husband, and she had a job," and Deirdre ran out of steam. "She's all right?" "She's fine." "Peck sauce? Hold on." Deirdre fumbled for her purse with her free hand. I extracted her phone, thumbed to the picture I'd taken, and held it up for them. "See?" she said. "That's us. Right over there, that table, that was today. She came back. Nora's eyes filled. I thought I saw her. I thought I'd dreamed her. She came back. She came back, Mum. Nora squinted at the phone. She's older than I thought she'd be. Mom! Oh, she's got his beautiful blue eyes. Nora stared at the photo a little longer, then gestured for me to put it away. She turned to Deirdre. I never wanted you to know. I never wanted you to think you came second. Deirdre leaned forward on her elbows, her hand tight in Nora's. Mum, I would never. I may have made a noise at that because she shot a quick dagger at me. I mean, I'd have understood. Would you have? Nora put her other hand over Deirdre's. Maybe you would at that. She squeezed. You're a treasure, dearie. My Christmas... Oh, Deirdre, you came. She smiled and said, Happy birthday, my darling one. Deirdre wiped away tears. Do you want to see her? I have her contact. We can... Somehow we can. No, came a blur of voices. I knew I didn't deserve another chance. And when I got it, to get you, beyond every hope. The old woman flickered again. A cloud of Noras, 80 years of them. Just hold my hand. And she vanished. Deirdre slumped silently against the bar, head down, hands still stretched out to where Nora had been. If she had been there, I put mine on her shoulder, feeling her shuddering breathing slowly become steady. And then she stood, gathering the tea mugs, now grown cold. Did that... Was she really here, I asked, taking them from her to bring to the sink. She came back. Deirdre smiled, wound the scarf around her neck, and tucked the ends into her coat. What a time we had at last, eh? Later, alone again, done with the C&C's final chores of Christmas Eve, I stood with the glass of brandy I had poured for a ghost. A long day tomorrow. Driving. A horde of grandchildren. At least 4 kinds of pie. And then home to open up for Boxing Day lunch. And to listen to everyone's stories and admire new jumpers and jewelry. Well, I've heard many a tale and tell very few. And there's some that, if I tried to tell them, no one would believe. I swirled the brandy in the glass and then raised it to my pub and all its ghosts. Happy Christmas, I said, and drained it down. The end. Thank you for joining me. Happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy whatever, and a good new year.